Lawsuit against the former CEO of local development company Epic. Todd Burning is one of 10 defendants in the suit brought by Bravera Bank. The suit claims Henry Land Holdings, which it appears was owned by a subsidiary of Epic, gave a promissory note to what was then United Community Bank. It promised to pay more than $3 million for land for a development project, Highlander Estates' 4th subdivision in Minot. And it says Burning was one of a few people guaranteeing that payment, but very little of it was ever actually paid. It defaulted. Now they want their $3 million back. Epic known developers in the region, but questions started being raised in May when they laid off several employees and many of their properties suddenly went under new management. In June, State Attorney General Drew Wrigley said he was aware of the concerns and, quote, "I made myself and our investigative resources available to the people who were drawing attention to it, and I'm going to leave it at that for now." End quote. That's from Wrigley. Valley News Live has reached out to several people from Epic several times since the spring, but they have not issued any official comment.